Will Donald Trump's freewheeling negotiating style actually work when it comes to Russia, China, let alone even our own allies? Well, Trump's already made some big promises before even taking office. He's proposed to withdraw the U.S. from a huge Asian trade agreement. He wants to renegotiate NAFTA. He wants to take a look at the one China policy that's been in place for decades. And he says Taiwan and the mainland China, basically, maybe they're not just one country. Oftentimes, he will tweet out something bold only to become ambiguous about the very same issue later on. Now, here's how David Ignatius of the Washington Post describes it. Several prominent foreign policy analysts have argued that there is some benefit in creating ambiguity and uncertainty about what the U.S. may do abroad, especially after years of prudent and predictable Obama administration policy. But they caution that this is a high-risk strategy which may create consternation among allies, even as it enhances deterrences of adversaries. So, Steve, here's my point. Let's say with NATO, okay? I think the four of us, and even, you listen to Mattis and even his own people that he'd like to see confirmed say, no, they're our allies. We're not going to basically hold them up that if they don't pay up like extortion, prices, we're not going to be there if they need us. That's not who we're. But could you make the argument, I'm not saying I would, but let me play devil's advocate, that you say, you guys better pony up more here because I may not answer the call at 3 in the morning that you need some help. Is there a way, if you act like the crazy man in negotiation, even with foreign policies, that you bring the person closer to where you want to end the negotiation at the end of the day? Or do you think that's crazy?
I think it's extremely dangerous.
Why?
When the president-elect Donald Trump deviates from 40-year-old policies like the one China policy, where we protected Taiwan from mainland China, where he says he's going to decide whether he wants to actually live up to our NATO commitments, whether he decides whether he wants to live up to the Iran nuclear agreement, which has kept Iran from developing nuclear weapons now for at least 2 years, and we look forward to many more years of that with great vigilance looking at their activities. It unnerves our allies.
Okay,
and
it
gives our enemies the wrong message.
But let me say, I'm Trump now, right? I'm channeling my Trump. So I unnerve him. Good. Maybe now some of the other allies, they'll pay for their fair share of NATO. Hold on. And you know what? Maybe China will think twice before they mess with us again because they don't know what I'll do next here. I'm creating uncertainty, and as a result here, it can't make it worse.
Well, here's the problem. Let's take Russia first.
Where are they going to go?
Well, he says he's thinking about rolling back the sanctions that Obama and the West put against Russia when Russia invaded Crimea, the Ukraine, and they had already invaded Georgia, as you know. So Trump is saying, well, if Russia agrees to reduce its nuclear weapons, we'll eliminate sanctions. Well, those sanctions weren't put there with regards to nuclear weapons. Obama brought down the nuclear weapons in Russia and the U.S. Those sanctions were put on by Obama and the West because of Russians' aggression invading its neighbors.
I hear
and
you.
with regards to China, Trump's saying he's going to get rid of the one China policy. China, while we are much stronger militarily and economically, is still a very big power, and it would invite miscalculation by the Chinese military, by the Chinese leaders, wondering, do we now have to be more confrontational with the U.S. and the West than we have ever been?
Playing devil's advocate, though, Jerry, couldn't you turn around and say it's the madman policy? Since you don't know who you're dealing with, there's an inconsistent policies. Maybe instead of manipulating currency even more, maybe they just avoid something with us because they don't know who they're dealing with at this point. Maybe it's just not worth it for some of the folks. Maybe if I'm a European ally in NATO, they say, you know what? Find another 5% to pony into the bucket here just so we don't need this in our life. Could he win even if he's upending policy?
I think it depends on how much leverage. I mean, in any negotiation, it's about how much leverage you have over, your opponent or the person you're talking with. And, we're talking about so many different countries here. Yeah. I think you're all right to some extent. Some will say, just get the money and let's get this done with. China, I would think that they would say, you know what, we'll come right back at you and play their games as well.
And I'll give a bigger picture for both you guys. Say he actually pushed his head, forget what Israel actually wants, and they move the capital, he says, let's move it to Jerusalem. Is there a thought that the Palestinians say, okay, we don't need this in our lives here. Maybe we'll be more, maybe we'll come to the table and negotiate a little bit more. Maybe they'll back off on some of the settlement talk positions they've taken in the past, as long as they don't, push that 800-pound gorilla of a new capital in Jerusalem. My point is, you've covered him for a long time, Trump. He never seems to mean what he really says the first time. I don't give him the benefit of always knowing where his end game is, but he's not afraid to go where other people won't. I don't know how this works, and especially people who aren't familiar with this as a shtick.
Richard, let's cut through it all. Donald Trump's method in life is fake your way to the top, and it's worked very well for him. He's become president of the United States. Remember Hillary Clinton? Remember her? She's gone now, right? I just want to divert. It's like, pow, at 11:30, he is the president of, and I don't know anybody that's looking at this real. It's like, are we in a bad nightmare? I mean, and I'm not looking at this from party politics. I mean, it's like, come on, this is a joke. Isn't the joke over? I mean, come on, isn't Hillary standing by? So what I'm trying to say here, Richard, on the world stage, what happens when an ally calls your bluff? Okay, you're a madman and you're talking tough and the press is reporting it. But what happens when an ally that we need, a NATO ally, says, you know what? Whatever. We're not caving into you.
I got less than 30 seconds.
Let
really
me follow
quick,
up on what Dom's saying. We talked about the reaction of our enemies, Russia and China, to the ambiguity and the change of policy by Trump. But as Dominic's saying, what about our allies? Our allies may say, well, gee, Donald Trump can be relied on. We're going to have to do this on our own, which means a divergent, different policy than the U.S. Or our allies say, well, you know what, let's get closer to China. Let's get closer to Russia. They're the ones who are stable with a coherent, consistent philosophy. Mr. Trump, we don't know what he's going to do. Let's get in bed with these potential enemies.
Bizarre, some of these conversations we're having. Coming up next, Trump's inauguration is more notable for who isn't going than who is. We'll explain on that straight ahead.